He didn't argue. He didn't explain himself. He just stopped showing up. No long speeches. No dramatic exit. Just silence. And suddenly, the whole room felt different. People noticed. They whispered. They wondered. Not because he raised his voice, but because he withdrew it. What happens when you're no longer emotionally available to everyone? What happens when you stop responding out of obligation and start protecting your energy with intention? You see, your intentional absence has more power than your constant presence. It's not disappearance. It's not weakness. It's strategy. If you've ever felt drained by always being the one who shows up, consider subscribing. This space is made for your quiet strength. We live in a world that worships availability. Available to answer. Available to reply. Available to fix whatever someone else broke. They expect you to always be on. Text back fast. Don't leave them on read. Respond, or they'll say, "You've changed." But here's the trap. Emotional accessibility has become a performance. And slowly, you lose the space where your real self could breathe. They don't want your depth. They want your reaction. And if you don't give it, you're called distant, cold, unbothered. But as Carl Jung once wrote, withdrawal is not weakness. It is the beginning of individuation. To become who you truly are, you must first detach from who the world trained you to be. In this video, we'll break down how to turn off that always available mode and reclaim control over your emotions, your energy, and your presence. Because sometimes, the strongest version of you is the one who doesn't respond. Let's begin by exposing the hidden cost of always being available. From the moment you were young, you were taught to be agreeable, to smile, to be polite, to say yes before you even knew what you wanted. You learned to be the peacemaker, the helper, the one who keeps things together, even when you're falling apart. You were rewarded for being available, available to fix, available to listen, available to carry what others didn't want to hold. And so, you became predictable, always ready, always reachable. But here's what they didn't tell you. Availability breeds expectation. And over time, expectation turns into entitlement. People stop appreciating you because they assume you'll always show up. They stop respecting your boundaries because you never enforce them. They stop checking in on you because you never say you're not okay. You become the one they text at 2 a.m., the one they call when they've messed up, the one who always picks up, even when your own world is burning. And for a while, you believe this is what connection looks like. You mistake access for intimacy. You confuse usefulness with love. But eventually, the weight of it all catches up. You start to feel drained. Not just tired, but emptied. Emotionally bankrupt. Mentally stretched. Spiritually flatlined. And here's the bitter truth. The ones you've poured into will rarely be there when your cup runs dry. They'll vanish. They'll go silent. They'll call you distant or cold the moment you need support in return. Have you ever had that moment when you reached out just once and they ignored it, when you finally admitted you're not okay, and the person who always needed you had nothing to say? That's when it clicks. You weren't in a relationship. You were in a transaction. And the moment you stopped paying, they closed the tab. Let that sink in. You were showing up for people who only saw you as a resource. not as a soul, not as a human, just as a container for their mess. And they'll keep showing up, as long as you keep answering. So, ask yourself, how much of your exhaustion is just emotional debt to people who never paid you back? How many nights have you stayed up thinking about someone who forgot you by morning? How many times have you replayed a message, crafting the perfect reply, while they moved on like nothing happened? How often have you broken yourself to hold someone else together? That isn't compassion. That's conditioning. And this isn't strength. It's self-abandonment, wrapped in politeness. You are not a rescue plan. You are not a safety net. You are not obligated to respond just because someone is falling apart, especially when they're never around, when it's your turn to break. The Stoics knew this. They taught you have power over your mind, not outside events. But if everyone has access to your mind, your energy is no longer yours. And that's the real cost of always being available. It's not just time. It's identity. It's your peace, your sovereignty. And until you reclaim that access, you'll keep wondering why you feel so tired. Now let's look at how manipulators exploit your emotional availability. Some people only come to you when their world is on fire, but they never stay to help you clean the ashes of your own. They don't check in when things are quiet. They don't show up when you're hurting. They only arrive when they need relief. And the moment they feel better, they disappear. Like you were never there. Like you were just a phase in their panic. You became their therapist, without training. Their crisis hotline, without compensation. Their backup plan, when everyone else failed them. And worst of all, you called it love. You called it friendship. You called it loyalty. But now, you're starting to see it for what it was. A transaction. One-sided. Emotionally draining. Deeply unfair. Because the moment you stop reacting, the moment you step back, they don't ask if you're okay. They question your character. They accuse you of changing, of being distant, of no longer caring. But the truth is, you simply stopped playing the role they wrote for you without your permission. And that's when they pull the oldest weapon, one that doesn't look like violence, one that doesn't shout. It whispers. It sulks. It sighs. It withdraws warmth until you chase it. It's called emotional guilt. And it's one of the most effective forms of manipulation. Because it doesn't need to be said, you feel it. Suddenly, you're the villain. Not because you did something wrong, but because you finally set a boundary. This is what I call the silent guilt loop. You delay replying and immediately feel anxious. You say not now, and guilt creeps in. You cancel a call to rest and spend hours wondering if you were selfish. So you give in. You reply. You pick up. You say yes. And the guilt fades. Temporarily. That's the loop. Every time you act from guilt, you reinforce the idea that their comfort matters more than your peace. Every time you sacrifice rest to save their emotions, you train yourself to put yourself last. But this isn't kindness. This is self-abandonment. In the name of connection, you're not a bad person for needing space. You're not cold for saying no. You're not selfish for refusing to be someone else's emotional safety net. You are human, and humans have limits. But manipulators, they're not interested in your limits. They're interested in access. Emotional manipulators aren't always loud. Sometimes, they're the softest voices in the room. The ones who say, "I just thought you cared." Or, "I guess you're too busy for me now." They don't need to yell to control you. They just need to make you feel like you're not enough unless you say yes. And here's where Carl Jung gives us a crucial insight. He wrote extensively about a psychological mechanism called projection. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. So instead, they project their inner chaos onto others. They find someone who's stable, calm, strong, and pour their unresolved pain into them. That someone was you. You became the emotional mirror for someone else's disorder. The place where they dumped the parts of themselves they were too afraid to look at. But here's the danger. Mirrors don't reflect forever. Eventually, they crack. And you're left trying to make sense of a relationship that only ever worked when you were breaking. You thought you were needed. But really, you were just used. Used for your empathy. Used for your silence. Used for your emotional labor. And when you stopped giving it, they left. So now the question becomes, how many of your relationships have been built on emotional dependency instead of genuine reciprocity? How many times did they show up only when they needed something? How many times did you mistake guilt for connection? And how long have you been stuck in the loop? If you find yourself in these emotional loops, if you feel like being available has become a trap instead of a gift, subscribe. We break down these hidden dynamics every week. Not to make you colder, but to make you clearer. But why do these interactions drain you so deeply? The answer lies in your psychic energy. They didn't see it coming because you didn't slam the door. You didn't argue. You didn't make a speech. You just stopped showing up. No dramatic exit. No confrontation. Just silence. And that's when the dynamic cracked. They texted no reply. They baited you no reaction. They pushed for a response, and all they got was stillness. You see, most people are prepared for conflict. They have lines rehearsed, excuses polished. They're ready to defend, deny, deflect. But what they're never prepared for is your absence. Intentional absence. Because silence doesn't just remove your voice. It removes their control. When you go quiet, truly quiet, people are forced to hear their own echoes. And those echoes, they're deafening. Strategic silence is not avoidance. It's not cowardice. It's not passive aggressiveness. It is the loudest boundary you will ever set. It tells the world, I am no longer participating in conversations that cost me my peace. But here's the secret most miss. True silence isn't just not speaking. It's not reacting, not explaining, not defending your worth to people who already decided to misunderstand it. It's resisting the urge to clarify your intentions to someone committed to misreading them. That kind of silence, that's not emptiness. That's containment. That's command. There's a force within you that only reveals itself when you stop broadcasting every thought, every emotion, every piece of yourself. Think of it as energetic gravity. You no longer chase. You no longer extend. You simply exist with depth. And people feel it. They orbit it. They don't know why, but they feel pulled. That's the paradox. When you stop trying to be understood, you become magnetic. When you stop over-explaining, you become respected. When you stop speaking just to fill the space, Your presence begins to fill the room. But don't confuse this kind of silence with disappearing. You're not vanishing. You're repositioning. You're not running away. You're reclaiming space that was never meant to be shared so freely. You're not punishing anyone. You're simply protecting what matters. And in a world addicted to reaction, nothing is more disruptive than a person who chooses to say nothing and still owns the moment. You want to know who has real power in a room. It's not the one yelling. It's not the one pointing fingers. It's the one who observes, calculates, waits, and then speaks only when it's necessary and never when it's expected. This is the essence of stoic control. Not silence from fear, but silence from strategy. Not muting yourself because you're unsure, but because you're clear. Not speaking because you must, but because you've decided it's worth it. Ask yourself, do you talk because you have something valuable to say, or because you can't tolerate the tension of not being heard? If your silence makes someone uncomfortable, maybe it's because your voice was never the real issue. Your presence was. And now, you're taking that presence back. No announcement. No performance. Just pure, calculated stillness. That is the kind of power you don't need to explain. And now that you've tasted the power of silence, it's time to explore the misunderstood art of detachment. There comes a point when you realize explaining yourself is just feeding the illusion that you still owe them something. And so, you go silent. Not because you're defeated, but because you've recalculated your worth. At first, they don't notice. They expect your usual reply, your usual defense, the same familiar performance you've been conditioned to give. But when that never comes, something shifts. The silence starts to expose them. You see, most people rely on your reactions to uphold the roles they've cast you in. The over-explainer, the peacekeeper, the forgiver, the emotional cleanup crew. But when you remove your voice from that dynamic, you remove their script. Suddenly, the version of you they depended on can't be summoned anymore. And they panic, because now they're left with only their own reflection. That's what intentional silence does. It collapses the performance without ever raising your voice. It's not about ghosting. It's not about hiding. It's a strategic withdrawal of participation in dynamics that drain you. And that kind of silence, it's not passive. It's disruptive. It interrupts cycles of manipulation. It breaks patterns of emotional dependency. It demands a new level of respect without asking for it. And here's what makes it even more powerful. When you embody true inner stillness, you begin to generate something rare. Energetic gravity. You don't chase. You don't explain. You don't fight for space. You become the space. Others start to feel it. Even if they can't name it, there's a weight to your presence. A calm, solid pull that makes noise uncomfortable around you. And in a world addicted to noise, stillness is terrifying. Because silence leaves people with nothing to project onto. No reaction to twist. No argument to win. Just the mirror of their own intentions unfiltered. That's why strategic silence isn't about avoiding conversation. It's about removing permission. Permission for chaos. Permission for games. Permission for others to shape your identity through endless emotional tug-of-war. But make no mistake, not all silence is strength. Some silence is avoidance. It comes from fear, from the inability to confront, from the desire to disappear instead of transform. That kind of silence shrinks you. It makes you invisible, even to yourself. But strategic silence, that's different. It's rooted in awareness. It says, I know my voice has power, and I choose when and how to use it. You don't speak to be heard. You speak when there's something worth saying. And when there isn't, you let your absence do the talking. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing. Nothing to prove. Nothing to fix. Nothing to offer but your stillness. So, ask yourself, do you speak because you must, or because you fear the silence? Because in that silence, you'll meet yourself. And so will they. Let's now reframe detachment, not as coldness, but as sacred protection. There comes a moment when you stop answering, not out of spite, but out of clarity. You realize that every time you rush to reply, every time you bend your peace just to maintain the illusion of connection, you're betraying yourself. So you stop. Not dramatically, not with fireworks, just quietly, consistently. And in that stillness, you feel it, the shift. Not in them, but in you. You begin to understand that emotional detachment isn't about being cold. It's about being clean, free of the noise, free of the push and pull, free of playing mirror to someone else's insecurity. Because that's what many relationships become, don't they? Unspoken agreements where you reflect back what others want to see and ignore what you truly feel. You become the stable one, the grounded one, the strong friend, the one they lean on, dump on, run to, but never really see. And when you detach, they call you distant, hard, changed. But you haven't changed. You've just stopped performing. That's where sacred distance is born. A quiet space between you and everything that tries to consume you. It's not distance rooted in resentment. It's distance rooted in respect for your time, your peace, your energy. You stop explaining yourself. You stop apologizing for needing silence. You stop editing your truth to make others feel comfortable. And in that sacred space, you meet someone you've forgotten yourself. You realize how many parts of your life were structured around the emotional demands of others. Always replying, always adjusting, always proving you're enough. But now, you choose slow. You choose quiet. You choose presence over performance. That's not selfish. That's spiritual. And if you're wondering how to begin, it starts with small, deliberate acts. Turn off notifications. Not forever, just long enough to feel what it's like to own your attention again. Practice saying no without a paragraph of apology. No is a full sentence. And it's one of the most honest forms of self-respect. Build your emotional boundary list, not to shame anyone, but to recognize patterns. Who drains you? Who leaves you anxious after every conversation? Who only calls when they need and disappears when you do? Awareness is the first boundary. Distance is the second. Silence is the third. And peace is the reward. Because here's the truth, no one teaches you. You don't owe constant access to anyone. Not friends. Not family. Not lovers. Not even your past self. You are allowed to change. You are allowed to pause. You are allowed to protect your space without guilt. And anyone who makes you feel otherwise was never in it for the real you. They were in it for the version of you that stayed small, available, controllable, But those days are over. You're not disappearing. You're defining. You're not cold. You're finally clear. So what happens when you stop being emotionally available and start being whole within yourself? That's where the rebirth begins. In the beginning, it feels like loss. You stop replying. You stop reaching out. You start creating space, and suddenly, it feels like everyone disappears. The silence that once felt powerful now feels cold, isolating, empty. There's a strange kind of guilt that creeps in when you choose yourself after years of choosing everyone else. You begin to wonder, was I too harsh? Was I selfish? Did I overdo it? Because we've been conditioned to associate being available with being good, to equate self-sacrifice with love, to believe that loyalty means showing up for others, even when they never showed up for us. So when you finally pull back, that conditioning doesn't go quietly. It whispers in the silence. You're not who you used to be. You're becoming cold. You're pushing people away. But here's the deeper truth. You are not becoming colder. You are becoming clearer. You are not losing people. You are shedding performance. And yes, at first, it feels like breaking. But what if it's not a breakdown, but a breakthrough? This is what Carl Jung called individuation, the lifelong process of returning to your original, authentic self. Not the version shaped by expectation, not the mask you wear to belong, but the you that exists beneath the noise. True solitude isn't loneliness. It's not exile. It's resurrection. Because in that space, in that quiet stretch between guilt and clarity, you begin to rebuild. Not to become someone new, but to remember who you were before the world told you what to be. Every time you say no to something that drains you, you say yes to a version of you that can finally breathe. You cut a string, a silent contract, an invisible chain that once tied your value to someone else's approval. It might be the yes you always gave out of guilt, the apology you always offered just to keep the peace, the version of you that never asked, never pushed, never needed. Let them fall away. Because the life you're building now requires you to be anchored, not stretched. Requires you to be present, not performing. Requires you to be whole, not constantly negotiating your worth. And when you reach that point, when the silence no longer hurts, but heals, you'll look back and realize you never lost anything. You just stopped leaking. You never became cold. You became precise. You never pushed people away. You just stopped holding open doors for those who never planned to stay. So now the question becomes, what are you no longer available for? Chaos, guilt, approval, the slow death of pretending. Because the real you, the one emerging now, doesn't run on validation. It runs on alignment. It doesn't need applause. It needs peace. And that peace, it begins in solitude. And it's reborn every time you choose it. Let's wrap this up with a clear reflection and your next bold step. You are not cold. You are not cruel. You are simply awake. Awake to the games. Awake to the patterns. Awake to the ways you've been giving yourself away for approval that never lasted. And now, you've chosen something different. You've chosen quiet over chaos, discernment over reaction, presence over performance. Because here's what most people don't realize. Absence is not emptiness. its intention, its alignment, its power reclaimed in silence. When you step away not to punish, but to protect, your absence begins to speak louder than any explanation ever could. You stop attending every emotional fire that someone else starts. You stop trying to be the solution to problems you didn't create. You stop making yourself small just to keep the peace. And in that stopping, you return to yourself, to your center, to the version of you that no longer needs to prove just to breathe. So today, don't just hear this message. Act on it. Write down 3 things you are no longer emotionally available for. What are you done tolerating? What conversations, expectations, or energies do you now choose to walk away from? And then practice the most sacred phrase in any language. No. Say it, without flinching, without apology, without explaining your way out of it. Just know, because your peace matters more. If this resonates with your soul, subscribe to this channel. This is your space to reclaim calm, to rebuild power, to return home to yourself. And in the comments, write, "I choose my peace." Let the world know you're no longer playing by their rules. You're walking in silence, with strength,